The palace kept a small room for evenings that ran too long. Its lamps were quiet things, fed just enough oil to glow the way a memory glows. A rug held patterns like slow rivers. In this room, a king sat with shadows resting on his sleeves, and a storyteller named Caravan sat across from him with a kettle that knew how to be patient. She did not ask the king if he was ready. She looked toward the window lattice and watched the night arrive in steady folds, as if it were a blanket being laid over a child. The king's breath sounded like someone trying to read in a room where other people are already asleep. Soft, careful, almost apologetic.
Sirin pouretea.
"We will not chase sleep," she said, as one would tell a skittish bird. "We'll set a table for it. Let it come when it chooses." The king did not answer. He let the cup warm his hands. In the very small silence that followed, the city outside arranged itself into bedtime sounds. A door bolt easing, sandals on a stair, two friends finishing a sentence they'd started in the afternoon. Caravan found her first thread. Out beyond the walls, she began. The dunes learn names by listening. And one evening, they said Nadir. She watched the king's shoulders. When they lowered a finger's width, she went on. "If you'd like, breathe with the story, in like night air over water, out like a tide that knows the shore." And the caravan began. On the edge of the night quarter, the streets forgot their angles and let the sand decide where to go. Nadir, a mapmaker with stained thumbs and a habit of listening to doors before he opened them, had spent the day tracing alleys until every corner in his head clicked like a tidy box. When he capped his ink and turned his face toward home, the dunes outside the wall said his name. Nadir. They breathed, the syllables rolling like warm flour through a sieve. He could have pretended he hadn't heard. He could have told himself it was wind leaning into the wall. But he had once learned that the world grew quieter when ignored, and louder when welcomed. He took off his sandals because some invitations are better answered with bare feet. A cat with one ear blinked at him as if to say, "Yes, go on. I'll keep the secret of your footprints." Beyond the small trader's gate, the first dune lifted a shoulder and settled again. Nadir stepped onto its curve. The sand wrote him in its slow script. Not letters exactly, but the shape a body makes when it remembers how to walk kindly. "You draw our edges," the dunes sighed. "Tonight, let us draw yours." "How?" he asked, and the question tasted like cool clay on his tongue. "With footsteps," they said. "With tea. With people who know what to do when the night is gentle." A circle of lanterns waited in a low fold of sand. They didn't shout like market torches. They hummed like bees surprised by their own calm. Camels dozed with their knees folded, tails swishing once every so often, as if agreeing with someone in a dream. A brass table held a kettle wrapped in a cloth too handsome for a kettle and exactly right for one. A woman turned from the steam, her hair wound like a seashell. Her eyes held the kind of light that comes from finishing a long, good book. "Welcome," she said.
I'm Shirin.
"This is the night caravan." Nadir felt his careful day unlatch, not with a clatter but with the click of a box closing honestly. He nodded to the others as Caravan named them. Amal, whose cooking made people feel understood. Tala, who wore a hand drum like a friend and never struck it harder than a heartbeat. Saf, who checked each camel as if reading a familiar poem. Caravan lifted her chin toward a low hill half buried like a sigh. "A copper bottle is calling from under there," she said. A genie sealed a lullaby inside, thinking stillness and rest were the same. They aren't. They walked with the kind of slowness that makes you notice how the sand remembers heat even after the sun stops talking about it. The sky had scattered. Salt across a velvet table. Stars, yes, but softer than that. Saf brushed the dune with a wide palm. The bottle appeared gradually, shoulder, neck, then whole. Dignified the way old kindness is dignified when finally found. "Let's invite it like a guest," Amal said, setting down a cushion. Tala tapped the drum once, not a note so much as a polite clearing of the throat. Caravan pressed her ear to the copper. "Is practicing being brave," she said. "It would like us to go first." Saf coaxed the stopper with a tool that looked like something made to fix a favorite toy. When the seal gave, the night tasted briefly of mint leaves bruised in rainwater. Smoke rose, silver, yes, but not cold. It gathered into a figure with a face you felt more than saw. "Good evening," the smoke said. "I am Sammy, who once mistook quiet for alone." "Good evening," Sharon answered. She introduced each of them as if tying small ribbons on names. "We think you've kept a song waiting." Sammy brightened. "For smoke, that meant becoming thinner where stars wished to pass through and thicker where wind might be tempted to hurry. I kept a lullaby still," he said. "I believed stillness was what it wanted. But songs are like cups, you must fill them with breath." "Then let's be cups," Tala smiled. She placed her open hand on the drumhead and let it learn her pulse. "3 breaths together," Sharon suggested. "In like cool hallways, out like curtains that have decided to rest." They sat in the small, correct circle that human beings make when they have chosen kindness as their first tool. Amal poured tea and did not ask whether Nadir wanted sugar. She set the bowl where his hand would find it without deciding for him. Saf hummed a throat note the camels dreamed to. Sammy opened his hands, shaped not by fingers but by intention, and the song arrived. It came as a room with a window opening itself. Then the tune walked in, barefoot. "Hush now, pebble. Hush, small knee. The moon has made a bed for thee. The wind will tuck, the dunes will keep, and morning comes across your sleep. If worry knocks, we'll let it yawn. We'll lend it night and send it on." No one applauded. That is not what you do with lullabies. They are not performances. They are invitations. Everyone's shoulders went the way shoulders wish to go. Even the cat with one ear, who had followed Nadir and was now pretending she hadn't, lay down with her paws tucked. "Would you like to come with us?" Sharon asked Sammy. "If I may be small," he said, "shy as steam. Big makes people think I mean to be dramatic. Small is the correct size for almost everything worth doing," Amal said. She held out a clay cup. Sammy curled inside and became the kind of glow you see when someone you love is in the next room turning pages. They lifted the empty bottle, empty but for the good quiet a song leaves behind, and secured it beside bundles of bread and kindness. The caravan rose the way dawn rises on days that won't be loud. "Where now?" Nadir asked, because a mapmaker's best question is always the next one. Sharon pointed toward a pulse of warm light far out where sand meets more sand. "A lighthouse," she said. "In a desert?" Nadir asked, not because he doubted, but because good maps welcome surprise out loud. "For birds," Sharon said, and somewhere overhead a small wing beat twice, agreeing. They walked. The sand was a conversation that didn't mind pauses. Far behind, city lamps tucked themselves in. The night thinned just enough for a song to travel without getting lost. Sharon let the palace room return. The king had not moved much, but the line between his eyebrows had softened. The kettle made a tiny sound that kettles make when they feel useful. "If you like," Sharon said, "let's let the chest loosen another notch." The king breathed, once, as if he might say something, and then didn't. The candle nearest the window lowered itself in the polite way candles do when nobody is watching. Sharon took that as permission and continued. The tower rose from sand the way a tree might decide to be a building. It was made of cedar worn to a softness you could smell. Sun folded and kept, summers tucked into grain. Between the planks, air went in and out in a long, unembarrassed sigh. On the top level, a lens waited, a circle of circles, each pane a place where light could learn manners. At the base, a woman stood with a basket of polished sand. "Amhawa," she said. The name sat right in the mouth. She did not ask who they were. She had already decided they were exactly the sort of people one wants to see after a string of evenings. "You may come in if you promise to move as if a sleeping animal has chosen your lap," she added. Saf put a hand over his heart, the old caravan pledge. "We promise." Inside, the stairs turned around a column that someone had pressed shells into years ago, while the cedar was still more friendly than finished. Hawa climbed with the basket balanced on one hip. Her feet knew which steps needed kindness and which could take care of themselves. At the top, the lens showed its trouble. Dust lay over it like flour on a baker's apron. Not an enemy, only a guest who had stayed because nobody named the time to leave. "I polish at dusk," Hawa said, "so the night birds can find their way across the open. But I leave the windows open even when I shouldn't." When I close them, I dream. And the dreams are heavy, Shiren said. Not a question. They are my sister, Hawa answered. She was older by 3 summers and stubborn in the way winter is stubborn when you need one more day to finish something. She sang. She sings still when I sleep. I wake before the words reach me. So I open the windows for wind and birds and dust. The dust stays. The words don't. Amal set the kettle on a small iron ring and looked around for permission to borrow cedar tips. Hawa pointed to a jar and made a face that meant, "Please, take. I have more." Tala warmed her drum near the lamp until the skin remembered a softer pitch, then cooled it with an exhale. Nadir opened a folded paper and, with a barely wet brush, sketched the tower's breath. Long in, longer out, so that the night could see itself and feel approved. "Let's clean," Shiren said, "the way you hum when you are not sure which song you're humming. No hurry, no test." They worked from the center outward, small circles that asked the dust where it wanted to go next. The basket filled without anybody scolding anybody. Hawa's shoulders climbed down from the place they had been keeping watch. 3 breaths? Shiren offered, in like the smell of bread under a cloth, out like steam finding a window. They breathed. The lamp's glow learned to behave like a good guest. Moths made brief coins of themselves on the glass and then changed their minds, as is a moth's right. Hawa began to sing. She did not plan, not this time. The song knew the room and knew her. It arrived in lines that could balance on a fingertip. I'll open one window. I'll close one more. I'll leave a small space like a barely open door. Through it the birds and the breathing can pass, and you, my sister, can visit at last. If night is a road and morning a bend, I'll walk to the corner and wait like a friend. She stopped, not because the song was done, but because a thought arrived shaped like fear. If I finish, she said, perhaps she will finally rest. If she rests, will I lose her? Shiren didn't answer with sense. She answered with a picture. Imagine a jar of honey, she said. If you keep the lid always off because you're afraid you'll forget the smell, flies will come and you'll be too busy chewing to remember anything. Put the lid on sometimes. The scent will be there when you open it. Rest isn't forgetting. It's remembering without guarding. Hawa's mouth moved in what might have been a thank you and might have been a sigh. She finished the song, half sung, half spoken. When morning is ready, I'll meet you there. Between 2 breaths, we'll share the air. If you must go, go soft, go slow. I'll sweep the step and watch you glow. The lens held the lullaby like a promise you can show a child. Light turned and learned the words by heart. Outside, birds stitched a path through night as if thread had always wanted to be wing and finally got its wish. They stayed for the long turn of the lamp. Hawa leaned against the stair and did a thing she had not allowed herself to do for months. She yawned without apology and let her eyes close while other people cared for the room. When she woke, water on the window had written small shapes and slid down. She smiled a person's first real smile after a season of emergency. I dreamed, she said, and it wasn't heavy. She wrapped a ribbon around the basket, tidy and unnecessary, and that was the point. At the base, Nadir tucked a tiny map he'd drawn of the lighthouse's breadth into a niche where any traveler could find it. He had learned long ago that maps of breathing are the ones strangers most need. Out in the sand, the tower exhaled through its seams as if to say, "Thank you for remembering I am made of trees." Next, Shiren said, "A garden where perfection outworked itself." Shiren set the story on a low shelf in the room and let the stillness expand by itself. The king moved a finger against the cup and then held still, the way someone does when they realize quiet has come to sit beside them and might leave if greeted too quickly. "Windows and lids," Shiren said. "A person is not a lighthouse, but the rule holds." The king did not speak aloud, but his shoulders answered. Shiren looked at the wick and saw it had remembered to be small. She went on. The gate clicked even before Saf touched it, as if the garden had learned to anticipate fingers. Inside, paths crossed at right angles that would have made a scholar proud. Flowers opened and closed by camshaft. Vines rose and bowed according to spring and cog. A bell in the far corner released rain from a patient trough at precise intervals that did not yet account for surprise. Eunice, the gardener, wore a vest sewn with narrow pockets, each full of tidy tools. His hair tried to curl but had been combed into almost lines. He greeted them with relief that embarrassed itself and tried to stand like dignity. "I made everything right," he said, "and forgot the part where right people nap." "May we sit?" Sharon asked. "We carry a kind of weather." Eunice looked at the sky. "I stopped trusting weather," he confessed. "Came when it felt like it." "Exactly," said Amal, setting her kettle on a flat stone heated by a small sun of mirrors. "You two should reconcile." They did not lecture the garden. They visited it. Amal broke bread that steamed in a way that made the air remember ovens. Tala drew a circle in dust and patted the drumhead the way you pat a shoulder after a long day. Not to fix, only to stay. Nadir walked the paths and took notes that looked at first like lines and turned, if you knew how to see, into suggestions. He marked places where Wind had wanted to visit and been told to wait. He left the paper under a rosebush as one leaves a friendly letter under a door. Saf loosened a hinge on the watering arm. It squeaked, shocked to be imperfect and equally shocked to discover the relief of it. Eunice flinched. "The hour will be off." "Perhaps the hour would like to be off," Sharon said. "Even clocks enjoy a walk." They tried an experiment. Eunice lifted the little roof over a bed of herbs. "What if it rains too hard?" he asked as clouds grumbled a conversation nobody had planned. "Then the mint will remember its lake," Amal said, "and thank you in tea later." The first drop fell early, the way a fresh friend arrives. Another waited longer than the schedule allowed. A bee, previously scolded by the garden's geometry, bounced between clusters and behaved like music. A rose missed its cue by a whole minute and opened more beautifully because of it. Eunice watched his careful world wobble into grace. He took a deep breath in and a longer breath out and listened to something fall from him that had been heavier than his vest. The lullaby rose from the new rhythm. Slight, imperfect, resolute. Let roses keep one petal late. Let clocks forget the perfect rate. A garden yawns, a small gear size. Sleep settles where the cadence lies. Rain arrives not when it's told, but when warm leaves invite it, bold. Tala added a brush of fingertips to the drum, and the garden answered with little percussions. A drip, a leaf's applause, a hinge grateful for its squeak. Eunice laughed once, the kind of laugh that knows tears are nearby but chooses to be gentle with them. He unbuttoned two of his vest pockets and let them catch rain until the cloth darkened into honesty. "Will it fall to ruin?" he asked, because love asks that before it allows itself to rest. "It will fall to sleep," Sharon said. "Ruins happen when we refuse to yawn." Eunice removed the bell that supervised the trough and placed it on the ground where ants could discuss it. "I will ring you when I need you," he told the bell. The bell looked relieved. He led them to a bench whose slats had worn to the exact shape of people who don't sit enough. They sat. They listened to time discover it could hum. A dragonfly stitched light between stems and forgot to measure. Amal poured cups and did not fill them to the rim. She left a small margin, the way good sentences leave room to breathe. Sammy brightened in his cup, happier among leaves. When it was time to go, time had become soft enough to say that word. They stood without scraping the moment. Eunice walked them to the gate, which clicked not because it had to, but because it liked the sound it made when admitting and letting go. "Come back when the weeds arrive," Eunice said, surprising himself. "I think I'm ready to know them." "Weeds are only plants in a hurry," Saf answered, which pleased the gate so much it forgot to click. Sharen's voice withdrew to the edges of the lamp glow and let the quiet at the center grow. The king's fingers had loosened around the cup. The tea had cooled to the kind of warm that asks nothing more of you. "Perfection can be loud," Sharen said softly. "Sleep comes for the gardens that yawn." The king turned his head on the cushion as if listening to rain against a roof he trusted. The room's shadow shifted to fit him better, like a tailor doing one last pin. Sharen drew one slow breath, then another, and opened her hands toward the next road. The library sat low to the ground as if it didn't want to wake anyone. Its walls were stitched with nightcloth that held the cool like a bowl. Each dawn, dew traced silver down the spines, and each evening, the silver went quiet again. The door opened on a hinge that had decided to be polite for the rest of its life. Inside, the stacks made a gentle maze. Pages rested, not because they were tired, but because resting is what words do between breaths. Bisma, the librarian, moved the way soft light moves across a table. She greeted the caravan with a nod that meant you're already speaking the right volume. We trade stories for quiet here, she said. People bring us the noise in their heads, and we lend them pauses. Her desk was neat except for one small mischief. A trail of glitter the size of commas. A silverfish with a proud tail peered at them from the rim of an atlas and confessed before anyone asked. I ate the commas from your oldest books. I was hungry for curves. I didn't know pauses were food for readers. Bisma reached for a jar of sugar paper crumbs. Return them how you can, she said. We'll pay you fairly. The silverfish looked relieved in the way small creatures do when somebody names a job they can do. Sharon asked for a tour not of the rarest books but of the most tired ones. Bisma led them to a shelf where travelers' journals leaned on each other like people on a long bench. Margins were frayed from fingers that had asked for help. Titles whispered, Night Fishing in Shallow Seas, A Guide to Listening for Rain, Maps of Rooms You Already Live In. Amal set a kettle on a subtle trivet that had been a doorknob in another life. The steam climbed slowly. Tala touched the drum with 2 fingertips and then just listened. Saf carried a basket with folded cloths meant for dust that would rather go home than stay. Nadir unfolded a small sheet and sketched a breathing map for the library, where the air paused at corners, where it gathered behind chairs, where a window draft liked to tiptoe. He tucked the map beneath a bookend shaped like a sleeping fox. Let the commas come back as room, Sharon said. She chose a book thin enough to finish in a sitting and wide enough to hold the night. The Netmenders of Quiet Bay. Bisma opened it to a page where the silverfish had clearly enjoyed a meal. Tiny half-moons were missing where pauses should have lived. 3 breaths, Sharon murmured. In like cool air under a doorway, out like a curtain deciding to rest. They breathed. The shelves joined in. A long hush traveling spine to spine. Bisma began to read aloud. She didn't hurry the broken sentences. She left space where commas had been, a space large enough for someone's shoulders to settle. The silverfish scurried to the edge of the desk and let fall a little stream of glittering commas, fragile and bright as crescent nails. They landed along the text and stayed, no glue, only consent. The lines eased into rightness. A boy in sandals drifted in from a side room, the way thirsty people drift toward fountains. He hugged a book without opening it. I like holding the heavy, he said to nobody in particular. Bisma gave him a cushion and placed the book in his lap. He didn't read. He listened to it rest. A woman with ink on her fingers asked for something that finishes softly. Bisma gave her the last chapter first and the first chapter last. The woman smiled like someone who sees a chair and knows it will fit. The lullaby arrived as if it had always lived here, and they had simply turned up the lamp. Between 2 words, a resting place. Between 2 steps, a gentler pace. A comma curls, the moon leans near. We stop a while and sleep is here. Lay down the sentence, keep the thread. The quiet speaks what need be said. No one said beautiful. People moved less. Somewhere a pencil decided not to correct itself and enjoyed the freedom. Bisma touched her throat as if to thank it for remembering how to hum. Would you like to stay for the hour when the titles glow? She asked. We would, Sharon said, and they did. Each book wore its name lightly. Not a shout, a pulse. The silverfish returned the last of the commas and, paid with sugar paper, danced in a way commas would dance if they got the chance. When the caravan rose, they left the dust cloths cleaner than they had found them. Nadir slipped a second breathing map into a pocket on the side of the reference desk that only a lost person would notice. For anyone who needs to exhale before asking for help, he said. They stepped out. The door closed with a hush that sounded exactly like a page turning. In the palace, Sharon paused where the story asked her to. The king had learned not to chase questions across the room. He let them circle once and land. 2 lamps made a small agreement not to compete. Pauses do work, Sharon said, voice low. They carry part of what you're holding. The king's eyes softened in the way a lake softens when the wind decides to walk instead of run. Shiren breathed once for him and once with him, then returned to the road. A flat of salt spread to the horizon, bright as a thought you haven't yet said out loud. Under it, a glass whale turned in a slow ellipse, keeping company with its own echo. It surfaced through a thin lake with a sound like a bell wearing velvet mittens. The whale was not fragile. It was the kind of strong that comes from long patience. Inside its clear belly drifted letters never sent. Some were thick with apology. Some were light with late thanks. One or two were jokes that had missed their moment and were sweeter for it. "I carry what people meant but never mailed," the whale said. Its mouth hardly moved. The words came through the water into the air as if translated by kindness. They hum. "Cannot sleep. Then we'll read a handful out loud," Shiren said. "Not all. Enough to let the rest because someone did the sacred, ordinary thing." They set up a table of smooth wood under a thin shade. Amal placed a crease knife and 3 cups. Saf stroked the whale's glass the way you reassure a horse at the start of a bridge. Tala tuned the drum low, then lower until it was more floor than instrument. Nadir sorted the letters not by date or name, but by weight and temperature, because some truths are warm and some have forgotten to be. Shiren lifted the first envelope. The paper had the softness of a shirt washed many times. She read, "I meant to thank you for the blue scarf. It turned January into something I could step through. I wore it on the day I forgave myself for being late to all the good things." The wind accepted the words and laid them down somewhere nearby, like a friend setting a tray on your knees. The whale's eye, if glass can have one, clouded with relief. Another envelope, thin, impatient. "I am sorry I left in the middle of your story. I was afraid of endings. I think you finished it fine without me. If it still lives in you, I'm here to hear the last 2 lines." A third, careful, lemon-scented. "If you're ever near the old fig tree, there's tea on the step at 4. I kept the good cups for no reason at all. I would like a reason." People drifted from the salt's edge as if drawn by a tide of listening. A young couple exchanged a look and didn't speak. An older man sat on a crate, folded his hands, and whispered, "I had a letter like that." The crate was strong enough. Shiren chose short ones between long ones, naming the rhythm sleep prefers. Amal poured tea but not all the way. Tala let a fingertip ride the drumhead like a child on a slow swing. Saf held the crease knife the way you hold a pencil when you're no longer angry at it. Nadir found a letter sealed with twine. He looked to Shiren. She nodded. The letter read, "To the friend I stopped writing to because I thought I had to be new to be worth reading. I stayed the same and grew anyway. You were right about the bread needing more water." He placed it face down beside 3 other letters that had used bread to apologize for something else entirely. Amal smiled at the coincidence and passed around a heel of warm loaf without ceremony. People took small bites and let them be enough. The whale's breathing slowed. Its oval widened. It released a ribbon of bubbles that broke at the surface like beads, each popping with the softest plink. Shiren placed both palms lightly on the table. "We'll stop here," she said. "Enough heard, enough kept." The lullaby rose from the freed kindness and floated across the salt. Letters drift, then learn to land. A folded hope, an opened hand. Say it softly. Let it be. What's heard can finally fall asleep. Where words were held, make room instead. Let quiet do the rest of said. The whale lowered itself into the lake with the sort of gratitude that does not require words. The unsent letters still inside grew less restless, knowing their neighbors had reached air. A heron stepped past like a librarian returning a book on time. Shiren left the crease knife on the table for anyone who might come after, along with blank paper and 3 plain envelopes. Nadir set a small sign that read, "Write something small. Read it once. Counts." They walked on. The salt lightened their steps the way relief lightens a chest. The palace room took the sound of the whale and put it on a shelf. The king watched it rest there. Shiren set a fresh cup near him but said nothing about drinking. He lifted it when his hands wanted warm. "Enough can be a prayer," she said. "Enough heard. Enough kept. Enough for tonight." The king's face did a thing faces do when they remember they are not the same as the stories they've been telling. Shiren measured the quiet, found it generous, and threaded the next road. The city stood like a collection of instruments at rest. Time was measured not by brass in towers but by breezes. An east stir announced morning. A south drift waved in noon. The hour before sleeping smelled of lavender westerlies that wandered among roofs. Banners measured seconds by their lean. Children read the day in the way a sleeve moved across a window. A boy named Jad lived 3 lanes up from the market, in a room where the winds disagreed over whose turn it was. His bed sat beneath a lattice that loved to flutter. His nights were sometimes 2 nights and sometimes none. Time changes too much above my head, he said, serious in the way children are when they're tired. I try to sleep when the purple wind comes, but the yellow wind barges in and says it's morning. Shiren examined the room. The ribbons over the bed were beautiful and excitable. A feather hung from a string and argued with itself. Let's make you a pocket that doesn't care what the world does, she said. The world may continue. Your pillow will keep different hours. Amal found soft fabric and stitched a pouch the size of a small loaf. Saf filled it with steady air. He remembered from sitting beside an old, patient camel who had watched a decade of moons and judged none of them. Sammy curled inside as a glow, not to light the room, but to remind the pouch how to be calm even in the dark. Nadir drew a circle on the floor by the bed. 2 simple lines, one inside the other, with a place marked where Jad's feet could stand when he wanted the day to slow. 3 breaths, Shiren said, with your hand on the pouch. In like the smell of your blanket when you've left it in the sun. Out like curtains closing in a kind house. Jad breathed and watched the ribbons forget to argue. The feather settled so gently it made no sound at all. They took him to the city square where the largest wind clock lived. It was not a clock the way strangers expect. It was a ring of poles with lengths of cloth tuned to different hours. People came to stand beneath the one they needed. Shopkeepers checked the 10 o'clock pane. Bakers liked the sourdough breeze that told them the second rise was done. A widow lingered under a slow gust that meant letters would find her today. A municipal keeper in a felt hat asked the caravan if they were wind thieves. Shiren said they were wind readers. The hat tilted, approving. Jad needs 1 wind to keep, Shiren explained. The keeper knelt to the boy. Pick a cloth, he said. Not because it's best, because it's true for you. Jad walked the circle. He put his palm beneath each strip and waited. Most brushed him and moved on. 1. A soft strip the color of unripe figs, lowered itself and stayed, not pressing, simply attending. This one, Jad said. Name it, the keeper told him. Named winds behave. Jad thought, I'll call it bedtime wind even if what? Even if the market drums are still practicing. Even if the cat chooses the tin roof. Even if someone is laughing 2 doors down. Shiren did not ask him to finish the sentence. The name was complete. They cut a small length of the cloth and stitched it along the seam of Jad's pouch. The keeper blessed it with an untheatrical nod. Tala tapped the drum once the way you tap a barometer. Back in Jad's room, they tied the pouch to the headboard. Nadir redrew the floor circle as a double comfort. 1 ring to stand in before sleeping. 1 ring to step into if he woke in the night and wanted help finding the same wind again. Shiren gave the lullaby small and plain, the way you hand a child a key and don't call it magic. In my pocket lives 1 breeze, made of hush and olive trees. While hours wander, this will stay, a quiet wind to end the day. Even if the world goes on, this little gust will keep the yawn. Jad lay back with his fingers on the seam. The purple wind announced itself. The yellow minded its own business for once. A neighbor dropped a pan and apologized to nobody in particular. The apology was accepted. Jad slept. Shiren, Amal, Saf, Tala, Sammy, and Nadir stepped onto the street. The wind clock square sent them a polite draft that meant safe travels. They walked with the kind of slowness that feeds steps instead of spending them. The palace room felt the bedtime wind even if and tried it on. Suited. The king's breath and the curtains reached an agreement. Shiren did nothing more than keep the story's door open and the work of quiet visible. Some hours argue, she said. You don't have to referee. The king's face softened the way any face does when it is no longer on duty. Outside, a guard's sandal clicked once, then remembered to be felt instead of heard. Shiren let the silence grow its own edges and then set her hands in her lap, ready for the next stretch when you are. The caravan reached the place where stone rose from sand with the confidence of old bread. The mountain was not sharp. It had learned roundness from years of weather and from carrying so much of other people's weather itself. Shepherds nodded to it as one nods to an ant who has always had a spare chair and a bucket of cool water. A path climbed in long, forgiving switchbacks. Saf led the camels with short words the camels liked. Amal hung a small pot from a pole to keep the steps honest. Tala walked without striking the drum, letting her palms rest so the skin would learn the air. Nadir took slow notes not of where to go, but of where it felt right to stop. Halfway up, the mountain spoke. Its voice was a hallway that had forgotten there were doors and decided to be only a hall. I am tired, the mountain said. I have breathed storms for dry valleys and held my breath for wet ones. I gave my echo away to frighten an avalanche into manners and forgot where I left it. Without it, my breath goes out and does not return to tell me how I'm doing. Shiren set the packs down. Then we will listen, she said. Not to fix, to notice. They made listening posts the way people make tea, with intention but no drama. Nadir drew small circles on the ground with pebbles, each the size of a saucer. Places where someone could sit and be paid attention to by earth. Amal lined the circles with thyme sprigs that would give off a promise when warmed. Tala placed the drum flat and let the heel of her hand drop on it once, then waited, measuring the silence that followed. Villagers arrived in ones and twos, hats in hand, with voices shaped by wind and kindness. A grandmother brought bread wrapped in cloth that had been washed so many times it had turned into soft weather. The mountain has been generous, she said. We would like to give it back what belongs to it. They told the mountain stories of its own sound. A laugh it made when a goat slipped and recovered. A hush it put around a funeral. The time it hummed winter away from a fig tree just long enough for 2 more jars of jam. Each story went out and waited. None returned. The echo hid like a shy child under a table that was also a cliff. Sammy lifted his glow from the cup and stretched it thin into the first opening of a cave. I can go a little way, he said. I do not do well with edges, but I am excellent at being in between. Take the smell of soup with you, Amal said, lifting the lid so steam could write briefly on Sammy's light. If the echo is lost, it will trust dinner. Sammy slipped along a corrugated ceiling, lighting a polite path. The cave breathed cool stories of minerals that had never meant any harm. Echo, Shiren called, not loudly, but with the authority of someone who has saved seats at a crowded table. We're not here to scold. We're here to escort you home. Nothing. Then a tiny return, as if a pebble had learned one syllable and was trying it out. Tala placed the drum against the stone and gave it a heartbeat, steady as a camel eating dates. The sound went in. After a long, mountain-shaped pause, the beat came back a fraction later, smaller, unsure. Again, Shiren said. Tala played softer. Saf cupped hands and sent a low hum that camels use for goodbyes when they are not good at goodbyes. Nadir drew a line from entrance to the place where the echo hesitated and made a tiny mark like a door. Amal slid the pot nearer, and its lid lifted a corner in approval. The echo came closer in layers, first as memory, then as present, then as acceptance that this was, in fact, a good idea. People smiled the way you smile when a lost cat decides the sofa is safe after all. The lullaby came from that return, a round song made to be sung into stone. I send you back the sound of me, rounded once by rock and tree. Keep it mountain gentle, deep, exhale less now, learn to sleep. If storms still ask, you may say when, and let your breath come home again. The mountain's shadow lowered its shoulders. Wind crossed the saddle like someone quiet leaving a room so you can nap longer. Sammy gathered himself back into the cup and yawned the kind of yawn that decides a day. Thank you, the mountain said, and the path heard it. Rocks behaved. They ate soup flavored with thyme and the idea that not every job is forever. A shepherd boy played with the drum by putting his ear flat against it to hear what it says when it is not being struck. Everyone approved. When they descended, the switchbacks were kinder, not because gravity had changed, but because the mountain had. Back in the small room, Caravan let silence carry the weight of the ascent down the king's shoulders. He rubbed his thumb along the cup's rim, the way a person does when learning the shape of a quieter habit. Breath is a conversation, Caravan said. You send and you receive. No need to give away the echo that tells you how you're doing. The king inhaled long, exhaled longer, and the room answered him by settling a little. A guard outside decided not to shuffle. The story waited a beat, the length of a small kindness, and continued. The river ran black as if night had decided to lie down and be water. Calligraphers washed their brushes here. The bank carried drying racks and weighted cords that kept paper from pretending to be kites. Rana, a painter whose hands held the memory of 100 careful lines, sat on a low stool with a frown that hadn't been invited. I ruin the last stroke, she said without turning. Every time. The page is a landscape ready for a bird and I send a storm. Caravan did not tell her to love mistakes. She asked, would you show us your favorite almost? Rana handed over a sheet where a single blot had bloomed at the edge of a perfect curve, the kind of blot that becomes a story if allowed. Nadir held it at arm's length, then closer, then set it between stones as if it were bread cooling. This is a star with a blush, he said. We could find its friends. Amal laid out bread flat and warm, thinking ahead to what spilled ink might like to meet. Saf gathered children lurking beyond courage and gave them permission with a sentence. Bring your most beautiful wrongs. They came with papers hidden behind their backs. A character that slipped, a border that wobbled, a poem that dropped a letter and got shy. Tala hummed a pitch so low only kneecaps noticed. The river lapped politely at the shore, leaving a line it would tidy later. Caravan proposed a night of spills. We'll let ink be weather, she said. We'll name constellations in what we didn't plan. Nadir dipped a reed in water and connected blots with faint lines that suggested constellations. The napper's pillow, the patient spoon, the cat who keeps a secret, the folded blanket, the careful bee. Children offered names that made more sense than most maps. Rana laughed in a way that unclenched her fingers. The cat who keeps a secret, she repeated. Yes, she lives on the roof above my mother's room. The calligraphers, freed for an evening from being correct, let their brushes drop too much and not enough and at the wrong time. Paper drank and sighed. The river took excess and turned it into tidal script, the kind of writing water knows. A young apprentice worried his teacher would scold him later. The teacher joined a spill with her own brush and shrugged in the language of we're allowed. The lullaby rose from the slow joining of accidents into a map. Let spills be stars that softly join. Let timid hands unmake the coin. That fear keeps pressed on every page. The sky is kind to any age. A blot may be a gentle light. We'll read it slow and sleep tonight. Rana took the sheet with her favorite almost and signed it on purpose at the edge of the blot. There, she said, I have invited the storm to tea. She pinned it beside her mat as a compass for when her hands forgot. Saf washed brushes in the river with the tenderness of someone bathing a baby bird. Amal served bread with a swipe of fig and a mint leaf tucked under like a secret. People chewed quietly and watched ink dry the way you watch evening move across a room, with the feeling you are being let in on something old and right. Before leaving, Nadir drew a small map of constellations born from spills and tacked it by the racks. For anyone who needs a sky when the sky is busy, he said. The river curled around a rock like an S and carried off a little of everybody's worry. Caravan let the story set down its brushes. The king sat easier. A candle shifted its own shadow to be less dramatic. You don't have to aim for faultless to sleep, Caravan said. Almost has a pillow too. The king's hand found the table, and his fingers rested there without duty. He did not ask for the next chapter. He allowed it. Past a hill where goats practiced balance and jokes, the land flattened into rows of trees that bore boxes instead of fruit. Each gift wore a tag that moved in the breeze. For the neighbor across the stairs. For the teacher with the green scarf. For the man at the stall who saved me the small pears. For my brother, if he still likes stories. The orchard made the particular sound of paper and leaves discussing what to do about tenderness. Shiren stood at the edge and counted not the boxes but the kinds of intention. We cannot deliver all, she said. We can change the math by returning a few to motion. Saf looked up into branches where a package wrapped in newspaper had caught and stayed. He shook his head gently, then climbed like someone who knew about both heights and gravity's feelings. He brought down the parcel and read the tag. For anyone having a hard Tuesday. Amal brightened. She had a tin of cookies that loved that sentence. We'll carry it to a bench that looks like it held a lot, she said. They chose small missions. A ribboned envelope that held a ticket to a puppet show no longer running, tagged for Layla, who laughed and covered her mouth about it. Tala slid the ticket into a book of poems with a note. For the next laugh. She tucked the book through Layla's window lattice with the kind of knock that means no need to get up. A tiny wooden boat for a child who had only seen the sea in bowls. Nadir found the child building rivers in dust behind a well. He knelt, floated the boat on the small canal, and did not direct its course. The child whispered into the hull and pushed it off with one finger. A letter-shaped box that contained 3 buttons and a thread card, tagged for the dress that made you brave the day you didn't want to go. Saf delivered it to a door with paint rubbed thin at the height of shoulders. The woman who opened it pressed the buttons to her palm, as if checking their temperature, and stood there a while, remembering. The little jar labeled first basil of spring for the neighbor whose windowsill is always brave. Amal sprinkled some on a pot of lentils left warming for anyone who came late. The pot smelled like a plan that had forgiven slips. The orchard thinned. Leaves took back space where boxes had been. Birds practiced new perches. A man came running. Wait. My gift, he panted, pointing to a box tagged for the father I didn't know how to forgive. Shiren placed a hand to slow his breathing. Do you want us to carry it? She asked. He shook his head, then nodded, then shook it again. I want to make it, not only give it, he said. Shiren opened the lid. Inside lay paper and an empty jar. The tag had room for a date. Start with tea, she suggested. Put steam in the jar. That counts. He laughed in a way that had never tried laughing before and ran back down the road with the jar open. The lullaby rustled through paper and leaf. A ribbon waits. A hand arrives. The smallest gift rethreads our lives. Not every box must find a keep. Some open just to help us sleep. Give what you can, let some remain. Orchards rest when hearts refrain. They sat under a tree that bore nothing for the first time in years. The shade was enough. Amal passed the cookies for anyone having a hard Tuesday. It was Thursday, but nobody argued. The goats approved from a distance, then forgot what about. Before leaving, Nadir hung a small sign on the first trunk. Deliver one, keep one, forgive one. The orchard sighed, which sounded like paper learning to be leaf again. Silence returned, carrying the smell of basil and paper. The king placed his cup down, empty, and allowed it to be empty without reaching. Shiren did not hurry his quiet. Not everything must be finished, she said. Enough is a door, too. He nodded barely, but enough for a nod to count. The air in the room grew soft at the corners. Shiren set the last thread on her lap, checked the wick, and guided the night toward its hinge. They came to a plain wide enough to lay down a sky and not crease it. The ground held warmth where day had pressed. Stars looked lower, as if interest had drawn them nearer. Shiren opened the packs. Inside, folded lullabies, jars of commas, a pouch of steady wind, a returned echo, a map of spills, a few ribbons, a pinch of kind rust, and letters that said enough. We are not building a wall, Shiren said, laying the first pieces. We are stitching a door. Doors don't push. They allow. They arranged the songs in a circle. Tala set the drum at the center and played Nothing Yet. Amal set out cups and left them unfilled, promising water without demanding thirst. Saf guided the camels into a shape they liked better than lines, closer to a family at a table than soldiers. Nadir unrolled his largest sheet and didn't draw on it. He left the space as a kind of map of permission. 3 breaths, Shiren said, in like night air over water, out like a tide that knows the shore. The first lullaby threaded through the second, not end to beginning, but side to side, like neighbors leaning elbows. The lighthouse's song formed a hinge. The garden's imperfect rhythm taught the door to yawn without shame. The library's commas made pauses where hands could rest. The whale's letters lined the lintel. Thank you. I'm sorry. Tea? The wind clock's pouch hung from a corner to keep the door steady when the world insisted on being busy. The mountain's echo curled into the frame, promising to return. The river's constellations drifted overhead so the threshold would always know up. The orchard tied a small ribbon to the handle. For anyone who needs it and those who don't know they do. Tala lifted her palms. She didn't strike. She offered. A low heartbeat joined the work. Amal filled cups halfway. Saf spoke to the camels in syllables that mean we'll be still for a while. Sammy swelled until he was the size of a lantern's decision and then made himself small again. Shiren opened her hands. The door rose, not outward, not inward, but upward, as a yawn rises, as a dawn does when it remembers itself. It was not bright. It was soft. Through it came the kind of quiet that never demands you notice it but is glad when you do. Far away but close enough for a voice to reach intact. A king lay on cushions and watched light change against a lattice. He had listened every night from the first dune to this plain. He felt a weight he had worn like clothing he couldn't take off slide, gently, to the floor. Shiren did not name his pain. She didn't make a list of what to forgive. She used small words that fit into a sleepy ear. Open the door that wasn't shut. Leave room for breath where worries cut. Set down your name. Set down your keep. Night will find you. Fall to sleep. Let mornings come when mornings choose. Tonight, be one who gets to lose. The need to watch, the need to say, we'll keep the quiet till it's day. The door steadied in the sky, held by the weight of simple things done well. Somewhere a heron folded one leg and closed one eye. The mountain kept breathing and counting the returns. Hawa's lamp turned and did not strain. A garden let a rose be late on purpose. Letters inside a whale rested against each other like good neighbors. A boy's pouch held one breeze for as long as he needed it. A river made stars out of what spilled. An orchard slept lighter. The king's eyelids lowered. Not because he commanded them, because permission had been offered and accepted. His breath went out and came back and told him how he was. He did not thank Shiren. Thanks can be loud. He slept. The caravan washed cups in a shallow bowl and left them to dry on stones warm enough to remember everyone's names for a while. Nadir rolled his blank map. Some maps are only visible with eyes closed, he said. They sat, not speaking, while the door did what good doors do. Quietly exist so other things can happen. When dawn began, reluctant, honest, barefoot, Shiren gathered the edges of night the way one gathers cloth after mending and set them in a basket for later. The palace woke without proving it. Kitchen clatter remembered to be soft. Courtyard birds made round notes and then swallowed them, content. The room where the king had listened kept the shape of his rest, the way a chair keeps the warmth of a person after they stand. Shiren poured tea for herself. Not ceremony, breakfast. She did not look to see if the king was watching. Sleep is shy. It prefers not to be checked on. A servant who had practiced silence all her life stepped to the door and saw that the king's face was different by a small degree that mattered. She set a tray down the way one sets a letter through a slot. Without wake. Shiren went to the window lattice. The sky carried a seam of light. The door, not gone, not insisting. Children would see it if they learned the trick of pausing. Old people would smile at it like meeting a friend they used to see more often. Travelers would nod and adjust their packs less tightly. She spoke not to the king, but to the air. We don't force rest, she said. We make it welcome. Then, to anyone who might be still awake in any house, she offered the last small practice. Breathe in like night air over water. Breathe out like a tide that knows the shore. Again, and once more, slower, as if pulling a blanket over your knees. Outside, market stalls uncovered their figs, a broom met a doorstep, and both were satisfied. The day picked up its basket and proceeded without hurry. The caravan would keep walking. Somewhere, a new song would be waiting, mistaken for rust or dust or an envelope or the exact right hinge. That was work for another night, not this morning. Shiren blew out the lamp. The wick gave one last, polite curl of smoke and then became only wick again, right, enough, done. The door in the sky did its quiet job. Sleep had come. Morning was patient. Everyone had time.